So welcome to the final episode of Fandom Feature, everybody. It has been so wonderful coming to you guys once a month for the last 3 years, talking about some of my all-time favorite movies, and especially a lot of the movies in that collection that you see behind me. But I'm hoping that you're not surprised about the 3 films that we're going to be talking about today, because for the last 10 years, especially if you've been here for the last 10 years, you all know that my favorite film of all time is the Robert Zemeckis classic from 1985, Back to the Future, along with its 2 sequels. And this year we are celebrating the 35th anniversary of the 1985 classic. This movie, of course, has the amazing cast of Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Crispin Glover, Leah Thompson, Mary Sternbergen, and also the ultimate badass, Thomas F. Wilson. So, what have I not said about Back to the Future yet to all of you guys in the past 10 years? I'm pretty sure I've covered it all. But the fact that I sat down and watched these 3 movies, I am just really glad to come to you guys with my official review. And you know that I adore these movies, and believe it or not, even though there are definitely some things in this story that are outdated, it still is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, story ever told in terms of entertainment, in terms of full enjoyment, in terms of great, memorable characters, lines, and story plot points. I mean, I've said this for so many years. Marty McFly is the greatest hero of movie history, and I will stay by that till the day that I die, because that's why I love this character. Michael J. Fox plays Marty McFly, a young kid who is definitely not perfect. I mean, he's got a good heart, but he's very selfish, and one night he meets up with his friend, who was a scientist named Dr. Emmett Brown, at the local mall in 1985, and his friend Doc introduces him to his newest creation, which is a DeLorean that has been souped up to become a time machine. And due to a couple of crazy mishaps, Marty takes the DeLorean and goes back into the year 1955, where he actually finds out that his parents are there, alive and well, but they have not met and fallen in love yet. And just by a crazy misconception, Marty prevents that from happening. So now it is up to Marty not only to get back to 1985, but it's also up to him to get his parents to fall in love. This movie is just flat out fun. To see a guy truly out of time, just trying to cope with living in 1955, meeting his parents when they're teenagers, trying to relate to them, meeting his friend Doc and trying to tell him that he is not a crazy kook, he's actually made something that works, and just the whole adventure of trying to get Marty back home into his time is just so much fun. Of course, one of the best parts about this whole story is Marty's encounter with Biff and Biff's relatives from the past and future. Thomas F. Wilson is fantastic in this movie. He plays the ultimate bully. Even Billy Zane plays one of his cronies. He doesn't say much, but he's there, and he was unknown at the time. But the dynamics between Thomas F. Wilson and Michael J. Fox are just fantastic. He also works brilliantly with Leah Thompson, who is also fantastic in these films. Christopher Lloyd is a joy. He is funny, he is heartfelt, he is someone that you can totally appreciate and would love to have as a friend as well. But of course, when Marty does get back to 1985, Doc comes back with the DeLorean and says, we gotta go back to the future. So then we get into the 2 sequels that were actually filmed back to back in 1989 and 1990. And that's where things start to get really, really interesting. Yes, we do see Marty go into 2015, which was the future then, but now it is definitely the past. And the best part about the beginning of that movie is the fact that you take a look at the vision of the future that Robert Zemeckis and the crew put together, and yeah, it's really, really campy. It's complete honky-tonk, but it's just like, it's fun to see what people thought the future was going to be when it turns out that it really has not become what some of us wanted it to be. I mean, let's face it, we all wish that we had hoverboards and flying cars by now. But what I really like about Back to the Future Part 2 is what happens after Marty gets back to 1985, because this is where a very interesting kind of storytelling takes place. We are introduced to the alternate reality. It is something that we had heard about in stories and stuff, but we never actually really saw it in film. So Marty, because of the fact that when he was in the future, he wanted to pick up a sports almanac so he could place a couple of bets in the past to make some money, it falls into old Biff's hands and he takes it back into the past, creating a alternate 1985, basically where Marty is in dire straits, Doc has been committed, and Marty's dad has been murdered by Biff and married his mother. And then it is up to Marty to actually find out where did this sports almanac go to Biff in the past. Because even if they go back into the future, it will be the future of the current crazy reality. They find out it's 1955, on the exact same day that Marty had to come back to the future from 1955. And that's where we see an even more interesting thing done. We see the whole story of Back to the Future Part 1 told in a completely different angle, and it is just so cool to see Marty from Back to the Future Part 2 watching events unfold in Back to the Future Part 1. And then, of course, they succeed on their mission, but then lightning strikes the DeLorean, and Doc disappears. Then Marty finds out that Doc was sent back to 1885, and Marty has to go back into the Old West in Back to the Future Part 3 because he finds out that Doc was killed by Buford Tannen. So then Marty goes back into the past, and he's a cowboy for a little while. Doc meets a school teacher and falls in love, and the way that they try to get Marty back to the future is just so cool and so creative. But what's so interesting about Back to the Future Part 3 is Marty has a very interesting revelation told in mystery by Doc, because Doc knows something about Marty, and that is the fact that Marty is very headstrong and he rushes into things without thinking, especially if he's called a coward. And Doc can't tell him that it's because of that personality trait where Marty screws up his future. But Marty being in the past, especially in the Old West, he learns way too much for his own good, and he realizes that there are certain things that have to be taken into consideration and other sacrifices have to be made for the good of others. And of course, Marty does succeed going back into his old time, and we do, in fact, get a very nice happily ever after. So I've pretty much gave you guys the plot of all three films, but these films have been around for a long time, so if you haven't seen the Back to the Future trilogy yet, I have no idea what you've been doing with your lives, because these three films are true entertainment gold. You are just going to have such a fun time with all three of these films. The story is just so awesome. The characters are so relatable and lovable. The score by Alan Silvestri is one of the greatest film scores of all time, and even though some things may be out of date and some of the special effects may look a little bit primitive, the movie itself just works beautifully. There is no need to remaster these films. There is no reason to remake these films. I don't know why there are people out there that want to see Back to the Future remade. I think that that is heresy. It's like remaking The Godfather or Gone with the Wind. You just don't do it. And Back to the Future, believe it or not, is one of those movies that does hold a status like some of those true golden age of Hollywood classics, because it is just that special to so many people. Like I said, you have to see these movies. You have to just embrace this story and these characters. Robert Zemeckis, I don't know what happened to him, but he is just not giving me those truly great films that he gave us from Back to the Future in the 1980s, all the way to movies like Forrest Gump in the 1990s. He is responsible, at least in my opinion, for two of the greatest films of all time, Back to the Future, and that includes its sequels, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I'm hoping that one day Robert Zemeckis will finally go back to that truly creative mindset that gave us some of those truly wonderful films, because they become legendary and iconic in our history of our love for the movies. So that's it, guys. You have to see Back to the Future. You gotta see Back to the Futures 1, 2, and 3, guys. They're wonderful. greatest movies of all time. You will absolutely adore them. And if you don't, and I'm serious, if you don't like these movies, at least one of them, I want to know why. Because I need to know what you're seeing that I am not. And I just think it would be a great conversation. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you so much for watching Fandom Feature for the last couple of years. Please leave your comments in the box below. I'm sure you've got so many great things to say about the Back to the Future trilogy, and I will see you in the next one. Hey, thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. If you're new here and want to see more of what my channel has to offer, please click on the link to my last video, or hit that subscribe button to be kept up to date with all of my uploads. Content of all sorts is posted here quite often, so trust me, you do not want to fall behind. I will see you in the comments, and actions speak louder than words.